I still remember the dripping. Drip, drip, drip. I couldn't stop hearing it. I knew that he was talking to me, that well-practiced man. He was talking to me. But I couldn't concentrate. Drip, drip, drip. It was always dripping. How is it this wet in the drudge? Adam seemed nervous when he led me down the alley to meet with his contact from the followers. The path was strangely winding and smelled of smoke and mildew. I never really thought of myself as an elitist maker or anything. I guess you of all people would know that. But being in this place showed me just how much squalor we have been blind to. I saw children with no shoes, running through messes of black grease. I still remember the sounds of their giggling and their bare feet as they slapped against the slick, and how that sound became distorted by the oppressive height of the buildings above. The buildings where we're from, Etta. And past those shining towers, seemingly intangible in the distance, barely visible through the pinnacles of the Seven Anointed, there was Empyrean. And you could barely see it. It makes sense that the followers of Daniel have gotten so much traction in such a short time, you know? I mean, how can you trust in gods that are simply a bright smudge glaring down on your otherwise tarnished world? Adam still smelled of popcorn, even in the cloying smoke mildew smell of the drudge. He turned and looked at me, or past me. His eyes always seemed to cross a little. "It's right this way, Jer," he quietly told me. He shifted from foot to foot, clearly uneasy. "Now these folk, they're the real pious kind, yeah? Best to let them do the talking and don't say much." I took a deep breath of the rank odor that assaulted me, and I told myself to remember it. This smell is why I'm doing it. I need to keep Jessa out of this place. He knocked 5 times on a large pipe sprouting from a wall. A hollow bong-bong sound echoed across the alleyway, and in the dim lighting, I saw him lick his cracked lips nervously. I mean, how bad could these zealot types be, right? Do you remember when we first met? I mean, of course you do, but maybe not like I remember it. It was the day of my brother's wedding. We went to the bar right before to get a drink, to settle his nerves, you know? Anyway, we walked in and I laid eyes on you, and I swear I stepped out of my skin for a moment. I left our world and entered one where the unimaginable was possible, where something too beautiful to be real could exist. And it was you. There was a bag on my head before I knew what was happening. I was heaved into a sitting position and then lifted on the sweating back of some man. Or, I think it was a man. It's surprisingly disorienting when you're deprived of your sense of sight as well as any control over bodily direction. For long, I barely knew what was up, much less where they were taking me. I suspect that was the point. Anyway, before long, they deposited me like a sack, and the bag on my head was ripped off. I blinked to adjust to the light. It came from a workshop lamp, you know, the acerbic yellow kind that the drudge use, and it was glaring right at me. Well, not only at me. To my left, looking somehow more nervous than he was before, was Adam, his greasy hair disturbed in a way that made me think he, too, had been treated with the bag. Welcome. Welcome, Jeremy. May the blessed light of Daniel shine on you. The voice spoke with the comfortable cadence of a man well practiced in speech. Yeah, was all I could muster. I blinked back the tears. Those lights were so damn bright. That'll be enough of that, gentlemen, spoke the man. The lights lowered just enough not to blind me, and at last, with the sharp contrasting shadows, the room had boundaries. And then, all at once, I was torn from my daydream. I was so transfixed by you that my brother had to punch me in the arm to get me to move. He told me I was blocking traffic. So we sat down, and the drinks arrived. I couldn't keep my eyes off of you. I couldn't hear what they were saying either. Just your voice. You were singing a tragic number about lost love that made me convinced that you were just as broken as I was. You made eye contact with everyone and no one at once. I still remember some of the words. My man doesn't have my mark, but my man still has my heart. Maybe it was just the way you sang it, but I'd never heard something so tragic. Anyway, the shots were bitter, but I barely tasted them. I was drinking in your voice with my ears. You know, the more I think about it, the more I imagine you've met lots of men like him, Ed. The same sort of cold men who know exactly what they want, but nothing else. For all I know, he's the sort of man you deal with every night. He looked at me up and down for what seemed like ages, before finally sitting on the hard chair in front of me. It screeched as he sat, and though the bright light pointed right at me made it hard to see him, I could make out strange shadows on his hard, smooth stone-like face. His face scared me, but the light reminded me of Empyrean, I guess, so I listened as he spoke. Jeremy, Brother Adam tells me you're interested in the path of light, he said. His voice really wasn't like a drudge's. It was smooth, refined, sophisticated even. But maybe there was a tiny hint of an accent in there that he'd covered up. I tried to respond. Yeah, well, you see, he interrupted. The path isn't just for anyone, Jer. Can I call you Jer? You see, the path is about more than the self. It's about the whole. Anyone can want more for themselves. Everyone does it. Even the lowest of the low, toiling away in the drudge, want, somewhere deep down, more for themselves. I reckon even the husks want more than their lonely, wandering existence. Right, fella? The group of men standing around me snickered quietly to the calm response, but it was awkward, and they stopped as soon as he started speaking again. But you aren't like a husk, Jer. Adam wouldn't have brought you here if you were. No. The most simple man has something selfish inside him. But the one who follows the path, why, he has something special My daughter." I interrupted him and the room fell entirely silent. I swear, even the dripping stopped. I couldn't believe the words, but they just came out of my mouth like someone else had spoken them. "Your daughter. You think no one else has a child?" No, sorry, that's not... I tried to correct my mistake, and already my blood began to boil around my face, and the knots which tied my wrist to the metal back of the chair became all the more apparent. I knew I had to correct my mistake, and quickly. The light swayed and cast dark shadows under the man's eye sockets and cheekbones. But I spoke. My daughter has MAS. We can barely afford her Respiraton. If we, as successful passers of the mark, can barely take care of our own daughter, I can only imagine the drudge. I can only imagine how terrible it must be down there in the dark. Of course, I want the light of Empyrean to shine on me and my family, but shouldn't it shine on everyone? There was a horrible silence after my words. The sounds echoed in the hard chamber walls until they dissipated and nothing remained. No, the dripping remained. Drip, drip, drip. It didn't stop this time. I glanced worriedly at the well-practiced man and back to the various men who stood confidently around me and Adam. This went on for what seemed like an eternity, for the well-practiced man looked at me with his cold blue eyes. "It seems we have a new member to our order, brothers and sisters." Soon, the room that was once utterly silent, apart from the drip, 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 was a storm of roaring cheers as they clapped their hands on my shoulders and one another's. When the storm quieted down, the well-practiced man looked at me straight, his icy blue eyes just inches away from mine. "Welcome to the followers, Brother Jeremy. I'm Brockett, and this is your new family." A week and a half later, I became a regular at your bar, which was a bit out of character for someone like me. I was always wearing my blue smock. Chuck, the bartender, called me out at once. "You don't look like you fit in here, friend." He said it in that menacing way of his when he sees something fishy. He always reminded me of some kind of animal, woken early from his cave. Which I suppose is appropriate, seeing that your bar is called the Den. It's located on the boundary between the makers and the drudge. That dark smudged line which separates those who create from those who toil. It's a dirty place, with men made rough from tireless work. And somehow, you seem to be in charge of it. Like some sacred goddess, none of those men could touch you. And no one tried. Yeah, I said. I wasn't very good with words. Still not, I guess. I took another drink of the scotch, and it was sour. "She's out of your league, friend," Chuck pressed on, gesturing with a flick of his head. "I've seen you eyeing her the past few days. Let me tell you one thing." His breath smelled like old leather and booze as he leaned in. "She may sing for us down here, but that don't mean she's one of us. She chooses to come and sing for us, probably to get away from pipsqueaks like you. I'll only say this once." I saw his fists clench. "Men around here treat our Edda right, so don't you go doing otherwise, or there'll be a lot of people with something to say about it." Edda. Your name was Edda. I tried to talk to you a few times, but you always look at me with a bemused look on your face, and then tell Henry on the piano whatever key you wanted next. After 3 times, I walked back to my seat, defeated. "How's that scotch tasting, friend?" Chuck said. Obviously, he wasn't thinking of me as a friend. I felt confident, though, despite your rejection. Maybe it was the scotch. So I smiled at him and said, "Bitter as always, Chuck." That did it. He reached across the bar with his bear-like arm, hard muscle covered in coarse black hair, grabbed the collar of my Blue Maker smock, and dragged me off my stool. "What's the matter, Chuck? I can close up my tab." All I could do was sputter my usual replies. His arm lifted me like a crane and tossed me with metal precision into the alley behind the bar. There was a sea of orange jumpers surrounding me all of a sudden, smudged with the telltale markings of the drudge. "Seems our fancy friend here's eyes on our edit, boys. What say we give him a warm welcome to the drudge?" There was a chorus of agreement coming from the men who were drunk on liquor and power. They were all huge. What did they feed the drudge? A steak-sized fist in my gut stopped my thinking. A large man whose beard was as red as his eyes was holding my shoulders so I couldn't fall down when Chuck repeatedly drove his fists into me. I heard something crack and I felt pain, more pain than I had ever felt before. My eyes blurred red, my stomach felt like it was on fire, and then I heard a voice. "That'll be enough, boys." You stepped out of the bar, a queen amongst her subjects. The men stepped back from you in reverence, parting like a sea. And then I threw up. The drip, drip, drip continued the whole night, but I barely noticed it. Where I once had a bag over my head, now strange men and women were putting their arms around me and smiling and laughing. It was like we'd grown up together, like we'd known each other for years. The very men that stood over me menacingly just minutes before were now clapping me on the shoulder and pouring me drinks of something that tasted sour and dark, but also warm and somehow sincere. This went on for a couple hours or so, and I struggled to keep up. They drank that stuff like water. There's something else, too. I saw once, out of the corner of my eye, a thin man pull a needle out of his pocket with the evident red liquid in it and artfully inject it into his arm. Respiraton. They had it down there. The followers, they had Respiraton. Eventually, when everyone was warm with drink and the energy had calmed down a little, it must have been really late at that point, but it's so dark down there I have no idea what time it was, Adam and I grabbed our coats to leave. Brockett seemed to come out of nowhere and place an incredibly strong hand on my arm. He gripped so tightly I thought my arm might snap. "Today was just the first step, brother. The light of Empyrean is inside you, and it's gonna change you. It's gonna change you, Jer. It's gonna be hard. It's gonna take work. A lot of work. But it's gonna be for the better. You can trust me on that." He gave a smile that didn't spread to his eyes. I'd like to think it was my courage and desire to care for my family that caused me to do what I did next, but honestly, it was probably just the drink. "I saw it, Brockett. Respiraton. I need some for my daughter." My knees were soft, and his icy eyes looked into mine with a small twitch that bespoke of anger, but then it was gone. "We'll help you and your daughter, Jer." His hand was in mine, one small syringe in it. 1 dose. But first, you need to help us. Brockett finally let go of my hand and helped me into my coat. But we'll get to that tomorrow. Adam glanced at me sheepishly, and he and I stepped out of the dark chamber to leave. As I looked back one final time, I could see Brockett's blue eyes glinting in the darkness. See you very soon, brother, he said, smiling. I tried to smile back. It didn't work. Adam was quiet on the way back, and I was glad because I didn't feel much like talking anyway. As we turned the corner, I heard that drip, drip, drip again, but louder this time, and I realized where it was coming from. In the nearly black, greasy alleyway where we stood, a tiny shaft of light was coming out of a corner. I stopped and I looked up at it. It was a tiny hole, just a few inches maybe, but it went up and up, for miles probably, past the upper tiers of the city and all the way to Imperium. Drip, drip, drip. I saw tiny droplets falling through the light and into a large bucket at my feet. The bucket had written on it in big, black handwritten letters, "Reserve. Do not use without permission." That's what the dripping was, Etta. They were collecting water, runoff from the artisans up above, from where we live. That's what the drudge have to do. They're given enough to survive, that's it, that's what they get. The speakers don't allow them one drop more. I don't want that for you, or for Jessa. I don't want the darkness and the heat and a few scrounged up drops of water. I know the followers are strange and a bit scary even, but if I work with them, I promise we'll never end up there. I can return things to how they used to be. We can get back to what we used to be. We will. I promise.
Before we get to any new news, let's get this out of the way. The Eighth Tower is a Harper's Farce production and was written by Jordan Gingery and Ricky Teal and produced by Ricky Teal. The voice of Jeremy is John Sanders. Music is by Harper's Farce. To find out more about the creators, lore, music, and other art, go to harpersfarce.com and be sure to follow us at Harper's Farce on all social media for updates and other news. Thank you for listening to the second episode of our little saga. We truly appreciate you. As always, be sure to check out the codex on our website, as it gets updated with each new episode that comes out. Additionally, be sure to check out the new music video, Liminal, an inspired piece out of the brilliant mind of Jordan Barnett. They wanted to tell a complex story of an individual's relationship with societal expectations and dysphoria, and frankly, I am blown away by how beautifully it turned out. That's available at harpersfarce.com. We'll see you again next week for episode 3. And now, it's time for the truth. He saw her and he wept, for she was all that he desired. Her eyes were green like the light from above that guided him, her skin smooth like mycota from below that filled him. And Empyrean's words were on her lips, dripping with wisdom, ancient and true. He loved her, for she was anointed. So say we all.